Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Ilavarasi Joseph. I'm a neurobiologist. I'm interested in studying the human brain at the cell and molecular biology level. Human brain is a fascinating organ, and we are making slow progress in the last few decades to understand how it works. Thankfully, we all have a brain, and contrary to the popular jokes, we do use our brain every day, every moment of the day. Our brain is very hard at work day in and out to make our life as we perceive. Even when we are sleeping, our brain is very hard at work regulating our body temperature and our breathing, and also taking us into this fascinating world of dreams, which we still trying to understand why we dream. In this video, I would just like to share with you some of the fascinating facts about our human brain. And in the future, I would like to go more in depth with the different aspects of the research that is going in the field of neurosciences. If I ask you to close your eyes and think about your favorite childhood memory, your brain can do an amazing trick. It'll take you back to that moment with all the sound, smell, texture, everything that is associated with the events will be flooding back to you. Our brain is our individual time traveling machine. It's the same. Our brain has the capacity to make us dream about the future. If you take a minute and think about it, all the current inventions and technological gadgets, they are the future dream of people in the past. What they dreamt in the past, it's become reality now. Let's get into the first fun fact about the brain. Such a wonderful time travel machine, it only weighs about 2% of our body weight. So an adult brain weighs only 3 pounds. You can just with if you put both your hands together, you can hold the brain in the palm of your hands. The brain has high demand for oxygen. It uses around 20% of oxygen. So that's why it's very important that nothing happens to that. Even like few minutes lack of oxygen can lead to long-term effects in brain function. So that's also the problem when you get athletes with concussion, anything that kind of like cuts the blood flow and thereby the oxygen for the brain. Even a few minutes can be very, very, dangerous. There are nearly 100 billion neurons in the brain. So neurons are what we call as the nerve cells. And this is about the amount of stars in our Milky Way galaxy. Take a second just to imagine that many number of cells, just like the whole Milky Way galaxy's amount, is in our brain, which is like just 2% of our body weight. And keep in mind that this is just one type of cells. There are lots of other types of cells called non-neuronal cells, such as astrocytes, microglia, and oligodendrocytes, so which are also in the brain. So this is just one type of neurons which we think it's contributing more to the brain function. So that itself is 100 billion neurons in our brain. If you take a 20-year-old man's brain, he has 109,000 miles of myelinated axons in his brain. So if you can look at this picture, this is like a typical representation of a typical neuron. This is the cell body, and this red and pink stuff is your myelinated axon. So this pink is your axon, and the red surrounding that axon is the myelin sheath. So this is like a cable in our brain that is through which the signal travels. And if you just this cable part of the neuron, if you take it, that's enough to go around the earth 4.5 times. That much of cable wire is all packed neatly into our brain. And brain is a fatty organ. It loves fat. It has about 60% of fat. And if you think about, if you're wondering where this fat is, it's just, we looked at the myelinated sheath of the axon, and that myelinated sheath has lots of fat. That's why when they talk about white matter and gray matter, this white matter of the brain is just this fat layer of the brain, fat region of the brain. So if you see the orange thing, that's your axon, and the blue is the cell that makes the myelin sheath. It just basically goes around the axon and kind of like makes it, insulates it. And this is a electron microscope image of that. And if you see, this is like the axon is surrounded by this thick bundle of myelin sheath, which acts like an insulation. If you take your electrical wire, so it's already, the copper wire is insulated with this black or white plastic around it. So that's the function of this myelin sheath. It just acts as an insulation for the axon. So signal doesn't get leaked up, signal doesn't get slowed down. So that's pretty much the function of it. And another interesting thing is that when this myelin sheath gets removed, is lost, which happens in many neurodegenerative diseases. Famous one is well known as the multiple sclerosis, and then you get a lot of neurological symptoms of diseases. So when you lose this, that means your signal gets leaked, you don't get effective transmission of information, and then your brain function starts deteriorating, and then it leads to diseases. This one is my favorite one, and when I tell it to kids in the school, they go like crazy. They look at like, what? So yes, we sense all the pain, the physical pain. Brain is the organ that senses everything and gives us information. Okay, if I'm pricking my finger with a pin or touching a hot surface, the sense receptor, the pain receptor sense the pain, and the brain says, oh, move away, take your finger off, take your hand off, so that we are protected, so we don't get hurt ourselves. But brain cannot sense its own pain because there is no pain receptors in the brain. If I want to put it in a gross way, if you take a brain out and chop it into pieces, brain won't feel any pain because there is no sense receptors. If any of you are philosophical in nature, this is a great thing to ponder about, isn't it? Oh, an organ that senses all the pain and kind of like protects us and from further inflicting pain cannot sense its own pain. It doesn't have the ability to sense its pain. So that's something to ponder about. And this is one of the most overlooked or taken for granted function of brain or brain fact, that our brain is very good in filling up the blanks. Most of you might have done the brain games of reading. If you have the first letter of a word correct, rest of it jumbled up, the brain can still read it good. But there's some other thing that does every day. The brain does it, which we don't give even a second thought about. It really fills up all the information, fills up the blank. So we have a complete perception of our world. That is our vision. If we take our eyes, the architecture of the eyes, the way the retina is built in, so this is our lens and this is the retina, where it's like a thin sheet or layer of cells where all our rod and cone receptors are there that senses the light. And then, so when the light hits this lens and those information is processed, captured by the receptors, and then it is sent back via this nerve bundle called optic nerve. That's where, this is the region of the retina where all the optic nerves exit the eyeball or the retina, and then all the information that is being captured by the retina is sent to this part of the cortex called the occipital lobe. So from the time that the light hits on this retina, on the lens or the retina, and the time the information is being taken to this occipital lobe and then processed, there's a lag time of about 0.15 seconds. If you think about 0.15 seconds, it's not much, but if you think about it in different settings or different concept, you are driving a car and then you see something and you don't have much time to react. So 0.15 second is important, especially when we have this perception that we are living in the present. When you look at this presentation and you think, oh, I'm watching it right now. No, you're watching it 1.5 seconds later. But we don't feel that. We feel this, we are living in the present. What we are seeing is in the present. That's because the brain is very good in filling in that information, the time information. So it just fills up the time gap that we don't feel the time lapse. Everything feels so much in present. So there is another thing also. It's not only by time, but it also fills up the spatial information. So if you look at the retina, the architecture of the retina, I mentioned that the optic nerve leaves the retina. So this region where the optic nerves leave the retina, it's called the optic nerve head. So that is a region where there are no receptors, no cone or rod receptors. So that means that there's nothing, no information is collected at this point of the eyeball or retina. The optic nerve head is 2.2 into 1.5 mm in diameter. So that's the region of the retina. We don't have any receptors. We don't collect any information there. But we do not. So that is called a blind spot. Each of our eye has blind spot. All of us have a blind spot. But when you are looking at this presentation, for example, you don't see any black spots in your vision. That is because our brain is so good in filling up that information too. It looks around the area next to the blind spot and says, oh, okay, this is the thing, oh, it's only this much close, so let's fill it in and it should be okay. So we are literally living in a world of illusion created by our brain. So it fills in all the black holes so we don't have any problem. There is a fun way for you to check this blind spot with this blind spot test. In your screen, you see a black circle and a black cross. You just sit there so that your nose is in the middle of this two symbols, right in the middle. And if you close your right eye, you have to look with your left eye, look at the cross, and you keep slowly moving towards the screen of your computer. At a certain distance from your screen, the black dot will disappear and it will be all white. That's your that's your blind spot for your right eye. The brain, that's the distance where you don't get anything. So the brain looks at the adjoining region of the black spot and it says, oh, it's all white, let me fill it, nobody will notice it. And we don't. That's the wonderful thing. We don't. We just go around looking everything so complete picture presented to us. You can also do the same thing. Now close your right eye and with your left eye look at the dark circle and do the same thing. You keep moving towards your screen. At a certain point your cross sign will disappear and that's your blind spot for your left eye. So this is really fascinating. Like I said, we take our brain for granted. It does all these things. And like I said, when we joke somebody, oh, he doesn't use his brain. No, his brain is working hard doing all these things. So it's like I said, it's such a fascinating organ. All these things that we talked about, all these great things that the brain does, it does through electricity and chemical signals. The language of brain is electricity and chemicals. Just like the computer talks, does all those complex, fascinating calculations and things, tasks through zeros and ones, our brain uses electricity and chemicals. Our great ideas, our future dreams and aspirations, our thoughts about morality, ethics, empathy, all these things, the brain does it only in the form of electricity and chemical signals. That's something really amazing. So if you look at the neurons, so you know the structure of the neuron already, the cell body and this long cable wire called the axon, which is surrounded by myelin sheath, and at the end of the axon you have this small axon tip, so it's called boutons, and that is where that bouton connects with the cell body of the next neuron and they form a connection called synapse. They don't touch each other. There's always a space between the axon and the dendrite of the next neuron, and there the chemicals are released from one axon to the other cell body of the other neuron. So see here, the chemicals are released and then the cell body converts that into an electrical signal because it decides at the cell body level, it decides, is this information important? Do I go ahead and relay it or do I not? So the neuron does this all or none. So yes or no. Then once it's yes, then it's being carried through the axon as electrical signal, and that's why you see the insulation. The myelin sheath is very important, so there is no leakage of electricity, there is no reducing, toning down the strength of the signal, and then the time travel it's so fast to travel in an insulated cable wire. So once it reaches the end of the axon, then again it's converted into chemical signals, and the message is passed on to the next neuron. So it's like a relay, so till the thing gets done. So that's how it communicates. Everything we do, that I'm talking, that you are listening, it's all because of our brain does converts everything into electrical and chemical signals and does it. And when this chemical and electrical signals or balance is being disturbed, that's when we have lots of problems. We have a lot of neurological diseases that happen, just to keep in mind. Like I mentioned before, although this is such a fascinating organ, and who we are, what we are, a lot of things depends on our understanding about how human brain works, how it's structured. We still are just scratching the surface of the brain. So neuroscience is relatively a very young studies, mostly not because we were not curious about it, but because it's so hard to study. Animals cannot talk, and humans who can tell what's going on cannot be experimented on, which is for ethical reasons. So it's been like, a lot of things that we would like to know. It's so hard to come up with a proper experimental design. So there are many, many questions and many studies that we are interested and we are learning. So for example, plasticity. Plasticity is the ability of the brain to change itself or mold itself according to various cues and inputs from the environment and other things. So this plasticity is a fascinating field that when I was a master's student, it was thought that the adult brain cannot change. Only when you are growing during child, your brain can learn and change, and when you are adult, that's the changes or growth stops. So you cannot. That's why this basic famous concept about when you're adult you cannot learn. When you get old, you cannot learn new languages. You cannot learn new skills. No, right now we are in the past decade or so. We have so much changes. There's a shift in our dogma, in our understanding, that we do know that our brain, even adult brain, it has this huge potential to change. It can change very drastically. So that's something we are still learning and we are trying to understand, and a lot of research still needs to be done. And the role of other cells, I mentioned about neurons and then the non-neuronal cells. Years ago, we thought that neurons are the only cells that contribute to the brain function or the phenotype of the brain function. And the other cells like microglia, we know that it's an immune cell. It kind of takes care of the debris and everything in the brain. And oligodendrocytes is the one that contributes to the formation of myelin sheath. And the other cells like astrocytes were thought to be kind of like space filling. They were just there filling the space and removing the excess neurotransmitters and so on. In the last 10 years, 7 to 10 years, there's a shift in that, in our thinking about these cells too. The emerging research is showing that these cells also contribute so much to the function of brain. So that is also a field in the neurosciences. Within the neurosciences, we are really understanding our ideas and perception about that is undergoing drastic change due to the emerging research and the data. This is also a fun thing that our ideas about the brain is changing very fast. The role of the various regions of the brain, we kind of thought cortex does this, cerebellum does that. We've thought we figured it out. But this year, as of this year, 2017, there's a publication that kind of made us sit back and take a look at how we look at the regions of the brain and their functions. Cerebellum is well known and is thought to be responsible for controlling the motor actions, because when you get your cerebellum damaged, then there's problems with your motor skills and so on. But research this year showed that this region can also play a role in reward control, how we do the emotional things. So how we respond to rewards and cues. Reward is a very good motivation for many of the human behaviors and has very big implications in many the many of our problems like addiction has a lot of this motivation and rewards are included. And the research this year in mice showed that, oh, this cerebellum not only on motor but also play a role in that. So this is something like kind of like makes us rethink everything and look at everything in a very different, approach and a different mindset, so that the brain is full of surprises. We thought that at least that things we figured it out, but no, it doesn't seem to be like that. Another region that we are studying a lot, we are trying to understand a lot, is how drugs affect brain, not only in the acute sense, like not now and then, but in the long term. In the long term, how drug uses affects brains, various regions, how it affects our cognitive ability, how it affects our executive functions. We don't know much about it. This is very important because of the recent push for legalizing marijuana use, which we really do not know. Of course, it has some great effects on pain and other things, epilepsy, but we really do not know how it's going to affect us, our behavior, the behavior, and other social cognitive functions in the long term. So that's something also we are learning about it, and which has also very huge implications in addiction, how we look at addiction, how we treat addiction, because most of the problem with many of the diseases with brain, neurological diseases, it's looked upon as the problem of the person. When if there is somebody has mental health issues, then it looked upon as the person lacking morality, the person lacking ethics. There's something flaw of them as a human being, but it is not. From what I shared with you, you should have understand. It's not because they are bad as a human being, because something is going on with the electrical and chemical signals in the brain. The rewiring happens. Something is wrong there. That is why this is all happening. But for us to understand that the study on how all these drugs affect brain structurally, functionally, is very important for us. It has not only for the medical, as a society, it has huge implications for us. Sugar, carbohydrates, we usually tell good sugar, a lot of sugar should be good for the brain, because sugar is the food for brain loves sugar. So we thought kind of like the traditional wisdom is like, okay, growing children, too much sugar, it's okay. Of course they get all jumpy and so on, but too much sugar should be okay, less sugar should be bad. But no, recent research and data is showing that too much sugar is also bad, too less sugar is also bad. It affects the cognitive functions of the growing brain. So that's something also we are scratching on the surface. And the other aspect of this is how food and how microbiome, changes in the microbiome affects the brain. So there is this gut brain axis, and last year from the Obama administration, the microbiome got kind of like huge input of money. So it's also something that we are still looking to understand. So that's a very complicated web of feedback loops and information flowing back and forth. So this is something we need to know, how the brain is getting affected with our food and eating habits. How we also need to understand how learning happens and how memory is formed and stored. What is the learning process? It's just not only our curious, like how we learn, why we learn, where is it stored, how do we form memories, all those things. It also kind of like has an implications for our schools, like how do we make them effectively teach our kids? How do we make them interested, and what is the best way to teach people? So that's also an interesting field of research that is kind of like going on, and we are learning a lot about the brain. This is something everybody knows, and we all accept and understand it easily, how to understand how neurodegenerative diseases are proceeding, a lot of diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, all these diseases. It affects the quality of life. And if in these cases like Alzheimer's disease, it's not only affects the quality of life of the person that is being affected, it also affects the quality of life of the people related to them, like a spouse who had been married for 30 years and suddenly forgets who you are. The children of that person gets affected. So it's not only a disease, but that, as with all the other brain diseases, it affects the society as a whole. It has like, it not only affects the person afflicted, it affects the family, it affects the society. So that's something we are really interested. We are making strides on understanding how this happens and how brain could regenerate. Like I mentioned, we are having this new data and information that brain can really regenerate it. It has so much of this ability to remold itself. So that's something, that's a fascinating field that we are understanding a little more every day. The last one, which people have not been thinking so much, I mean, we were thinking about it, but we did not have clear answers, is the role of epigenetics and how it can, play into transgenerational inheritance. Epigenetics is slowly kind of like developing, and it is showing light, throwing light into many of our questions we had. Like, also when it comes to neurosciences, we have these questions like, how does long-term poverty, how does continued stress, chronic stress, and PTSD and other forms of like stressful disease, disorders and addiction, all those things, how does it affect people, and how does it get transferred from one generation? Does it leave an imprint? How does it get transferred to other, from throughout the generation? So all these answers are coming up, and that has really great implications for us as a society, and how we approach our problems, and how are we going to address those problems. So those are the things that are really interesting for us, and that's in neuroscience has a lot of is coming up with data from which we can look at it and find answers to fight this, so that we can build a society that is really allows everyone, each one of its members, to live up to their full potential. That is the whole thing behind studying about human brain. We want to understand who we are, what we are, how what makes us like this, where does our, those ethos come from, what makes us moral, what makes us ethical, what makes us empathetic, what are we doing. So a lot of these questions leads to this, but then in the current society, the way we are studying neuroscience helps us to answer all those things. The other things that I did not really mention here is also like, it comes under plasticity as well as transgenerational inheritance and so on. It's like, how does the brain develop? What happens during the development of a brain in a child's brain? How developed is a teen's brain? What does it? So from these information, like, if you are a school teacher, you look at it and say, okay, this is how a child's brain is developing. This is how learning happens. So this is how I should teach my children in my classroom. Or if somebody has a problem, well, then he or she should have this information to say, okay, this is how I can address it, make it effective, make teaching effective, make learning effective. If you are a person in the Department of Social Services who are involved in, foster care system, child services or anything, you should know this. You should have this knowledge of neurosciences on how a child's brain is developing, so that you can say, oh, this is the developmental age of the brain, the child's brain, this happens. So this should be the way to address that, so that it doesn't affect their development. If you are in the judicial system, you also need to know, like, we have this huge recently push for this restorative practices, and we need a lot of changes in our judicial system, especially in how we treat our children. It gives them a great tool to understand how a teen's brain is developing. So all those things, it is this direct implication of neurosciences, where neuroscience can help the society to make us better, to build a fulfilling society. So that's my introduction video for you all. And if you liked it, and if you are interested in learning more about neurosciences, please do consider becoming my patron. And it's a recurring payment. You will be supporting me through a monthly basis, and in the coming months I'll be going through each of the topic in detail, and then we'll be sharing with you what is the latest research in the field and how we can use that data to empower us. I do this because I'm passionate about sharing all this information. Like I said, it's so important for us to know as a society. Knowledge is power when we put it into action, so we need to empower ourselves and use this knowledge to build a society that is a place that allows everyone to fulfill their full potential and live up to that and build a prosperous society. Thank you, and see you again in the future presentation.